Hello students, I am Dr. T.S. Roy, ex-head of the Department of Anatomy, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. Today we will discuss about the brainstem. What is brainstem? Brainstem is medulla, pons and the midbrain. The objectives are to identify the external features of pons, medulla and the midbrain, identify the arteries supplying these structures, identify the cranial nerves emerging from these structures or from the medulla, pons and midbrain, and identify the structures at the floor of the fourth ventricle. Before going into the subject, let us identify the structures on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. What you see is the superior border. Just below the superior border, this is the corpus callosum, which is largest white matter or largest commissural fiber of the brain connecting the two hemispheres. Below the cavity of the lateral ventricle is the diencephalon. The visible parts are the thalamus, and below and inferior to it is the hypothalamus. Below the diencephalon, this is the midbrain, then this structure is the pons and below it is the medulla. Behind the pons and medulla is the cerebellum. See the cavity between the pons, medulla and the cerebellum is the fourth ventricle. The medulla continues as spinal cord at the level of the attachment of the first cervical nerve, and all these structures lies in the basic occiput. I should take the advantage of showing you the blood vessels here. Here is the anterior cerebral artery. It is going above the corpus callosum and it is supplying the frontal lobe. Then you can see in front of the pons, this is the basilar artery. The ventral surface of the brainstem. Already we have discussed how the brainstem looks in the sagittal section. Let us see the ventral surface of the medulla, pons and the midbrain. What you see in the medulla, there are certain elevations and depressions. In the pons, there is a depression in the middle part and the midbrain is not visible properly. See in the sagittal section, if you join the line between the mammillary bodies and the pineal body, this demarcates the boundary between the diencephalon and the midbrain. So, this is the upper border of the midbrain. Below it is the superior pontine sulcus. If you join the superior border of the pons and posteriorly the inferior colliculus, this is the lower border of the midbrain or upper border of the pons, and line joining the lower border of the pontine sulcus and upper border of the pontine sulcus. If it extends backwards, this is the boundary of the pons. Below it is the medulla. The attachment of the first cervical nerve is the lower boundary of the medulla. Medulla continues as spinal cord, and the cavity between the ventral surface of the cerebellum and the posterior surface of the pons and the medulla is the fourth ventricle. The ventral surface and the lateral surface of the pons and medulla. This is showing the ventral surface of the whole brainstem. In the upper part, what you see is the optic chiasma, and behind it there is an elevated area and the mammillary bodies can be seen. The ventral surface of the midbrain, only a part is visible because it is covered by the extension of the medial surface of the temporal lobe or part of the temporal lobe which is uncus. In the lower part, if you come downwards, is the pons. Here is the basilar groove. Here lies the basilar artery. Then laterally, this is the attachment of the fifth nerve. Then below it, slightly lateral side, what you can see is the sixth nerve. Then comes the medulla. These elevations, if you see the lower border of the pons, below it there is an elevation and there is a nerve coming out from the lower border just above this elevation, which is called the pyramid. This is the sixth nerve. This elevation is called the pyramid. Why it is called pyramid? Because the pyramidal tract which is coming from the cortex, it comes through the midbrain, through the pons, and here in the medulla it produces one elevation. This is called pyramid. In the lower part, the corticospinal fibers cross the midline. By the side of the pyramid, another elevation is there. This is called olive. See, more towards the midline is the pyramid, then comes the olive. Now see the structures or the nerves which is attached at the lower border of the pons. Towards the midline, I already told sixth nerve. Then towards the cerebellum, this is the seventh and eighth nerve. Behind the pyramid, there is a group of nerve fibers are there. These nerves are the hypoglossal nerve. Behind the olive, there are groups of nerve. These are the 9th, 10th and the 11th nerve. Here on the lateral side of the brainstem, you can see the pons, the fifth nerve, which is the junction between the pons and the middle cerebellar peduncle. Below the pons, this is the olive, this is the pyramid, and these nerve fibers between the olive and pyramid are the 12th nerve, and behind the olive, this is the 9th, 10th and 11th nerve. The midbrain. This is the ventral surface of the midbrain. Already we have mentioned the ventral surface of the midbrain is covered by the temporal lobe. So what you can see is some part of the crus cerebri. This is the crus cerebri. The whole brain has been taken out, and these are the medial part and the lateral part of the crus cerebri. One nerve is coming between the two crus cerebri, and this area is called the anterior perforated substance. On the medial side is the third nerve, and on the lateral side the fourth nerve is coming. So what you see here, this is the third nerve coming from the ventral surface of the midbrain, and this is the fourth nerve coming from the dorsal surface of the midbrain. Here you see the midbrain from the lateral surface. What you see is the crus cerebri, then the colliculi is visible here, the superior colliculi, inferior colliculi and their brachium. Very nicely seen nerve is the fourth nerve. Fourth nerve is the only nerve which is coming out from the dorsal surface of the brain. It lies just below the inferior colliculus. Below it, what you can see is the middle cerebellar peduncle and the fifth nerve. Here in the ventral surface of the pons, what you see, this is the basilar group which is for the basilar artery. Fifth nerve has been damaged, but in the lower part of the pons, what you see in the midline, near the midline is the pyramid. Behind the pyramid is the olive, and behind it there is another elevation. This elevation is called tuberculum cinereum. This is due to the fibers of the trigeminal nerve. The dorsal surface of the midbrain. The dorsal surface, what you see, first thing is the pineal gland. This is the real brain picture and this is the drawing. In the dorsal surface, first you see the pineal gland, which is not a part of the brainstem, but after that what you see is the colliculi, the superior colliculi, the center for visual reflexes, the inferior colliculi, it is for the auditory pathway, and in between there is cruciate sulcus. Below that, this is the fourth nerve. I already has mentioned that fourth nerve which is coming from the dorsal surface of the brain, the only nerve which comes from the dorsal surface of the brain. And what is the function of this nerve? It supplies one of the muscle of the eyeball. Below it is the superior cerebellar peduncle. You can see here is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Then what you see, the cerebellum has been removed to show the fourth ventricle. Here is the ventral surface of the cerebellum. You can see part of it in the ventral surface of the cerebellum. Then open part of the fourth ventricle. This is the open part of the fourth ventricle. So what you see is the dorsal surface of the pons and dorsal surface of the medulla. The medulla has an open part and a closed part. The boundary between the pons and the medulla are these fibers. These fibers are called internal arcuate fibers. So what you see here is the floor of the fourth ventricle, what is very important for your examination. This is the part of the brain with the ventral surface of the brainstem. What you see most anteriorly is the optic nerve, and optic nerve is crossing to form the optic chiasma. Behind it, the two mammillary bodies can be seen. The midbrain is obstructed by the uncus of the temporal pole. Only part of the crus cerebri can be seen. What you can see is the basilar artery. Basilar artery, where it lies? In the basilar groove of the pons. Here nicely you can see the basilar artery is dividing into two posterior cerebral arteries, and before bifurcation there is the superior cerebellar arteries. This is a very important relation. The third nerve lies on the medial side between the posterior cerebral and the superior cerebral arteries, and the fourth nerve, which is the very important nerve, it comes on the lateral side. So two nerves lies between these two arteries. Medially the third nerve or oculomotor nerve, and laterally the fourth nerve or the trochlear nerve. The basilar artery gives branches to the anterior surface of the pons. It gives certain long branches which goes on the posterior surface to supply the posterior surface of the pons. Arteries of the brainstem. Already we have mentioned the basilar artery. So we have to know the basilar artery, how it is formed. It is formed by the joining of the two vertebral arteries which comes from the lateral surface. Then at the inferior border of the pons, it joins to form the basilar artery. It terminates as the posterior cerebral artery. Before termination, it gives another branch called the superior cerebellar artery. Already I have mentioned one important cranial nerve lies between the posterior cerebral and the superior cerebellar artery. This is the third nerve. Laterally, the fourth nerve lies here. You can see the branches of the basilar arteries. Basilar artery gives branches here, perpendicular branches, short circumferential branch. Then there are long circumferential branches which goes on the posterior surface. The fourth part of the vertebral artery, it gives two branches come anteriorly to join and form the anterior spinal artery. Then other branches are the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and some branches are given here to the medulla. The posterior spinal artery sometimes comes from the fourth part of the vertebral artery, or it is a branch of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. So the medulla is supplied mainly by the anterior spinal artery, posterior spinal artery, branches from the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and sometimes from the basilar artery. The dorsal surface of the medulla and pons. The medulla is a cylindrical structure. Lower part is closed and the upper part is open. In the closed part, what you can see is the tubercle here, gracile tubercle, and superolateral to it is cuneate tubercle. Deep to it lies the gracile nucleus and the cuneate nucleus. Here you can see this elevation is fasciculus gracilis. Deep to it lies the fascicles or fibers coming from the spinal cord, and deep to this part the fasciculus cuneatus is there. Here lies the fasciculus cuneatus, and posterior to it is the tuberculum cinereum. Deep to it lies the trigeminal nerve nucleus. We will see the open part of the posterior surface of the medulla. Here you can see the floor of the fourth ventricle, which is very important. So, what is here is the gracile tubercle, cuneate tubercle is here, then this is the funiculus gracilis, and tuberculum cinereum can be seen on the lateral side. In the open part of the posterior surface of the medulla, you see a fountain pen nib type structure. This is called calamus scriptorius. This is the hypoglossal triangle. Half of this is the hypoglossal triangle, and deep to it lies the hypoglossal nerve nucleus. Lateral to it there is another triangle. This triangle is the vagal triangle. Deep to it lies the vagus nerve nucleus. This is the median sulcus. Lateral to it is the median eminence. In the upper part of the median eminence there is an elevation. This elevation is called facial colliculus. Deep to it lies the abduction nerve nucleus. If you imagine this is the abduction nerve nucleus, the fibers of the facial nerve comes like this, and this is because of the facial nerve fibers comes, this is called facial colliculus. The obex is the junctional area between the two gracile tubercles. This is very important landmark. The dorsal surface of the brainstem, what you see is the pineal gland, then the superior colliculus. Below it is the inferior colliculus, very nicely seen fourth nerve. This is the only nerve coming from the dorsal surface of the brain. Then you see the open part of the posterior surface of the pons and medulla, or the floor of the fourth ventricle. This whole structure is the floor of the fourth ventricle. And the other structures, what you can see from here, this is the medulla. This whole thing is the medulla, and the nerves coming out from the medulla are the 7th and 8th nerve entering into the internal acoustic meatus, then 9th, 10th and 11th nerve entering into the jugular foramen. Here is the 9th, 10th, 11th nerve extends downwards also. So, in summary, external features of the brainstem. What you can see is the anterior surface of the brainstem. In the upper part, the optic nerve is seen, then optic tract embracing the crus cerebri, and in between the two crus cerebri you can see the interpedunculair fossa, the stalk of the pituitary gland, the mammillary bodies. The most important structure seen here is the third nerve or the oculomotor nerve coming from the or in touch with the medial surface of the crus cerebri. From the dorsal surface, only one nerve comes out, is the fourth nerve. Then you see here is the upper border of the pons. This is the lower border of the pons or junction between the pons and medulla. Here is the groove for the basilar artery. Laterally, if you go, you see the attachment of the trigeminal nerve. The attachment of the trigeminal nerve demarcates between the body of the pons and the middle cerebellar peduncle. At the lower border of the pons, the nerve attachment are the towards the medial side is the sixth nerve. Laterally, the seventh and eighth nerve is there. Let us see the part of the medulla. Ventrally, what you can see towards the midline, this is the pyramid. Lateral to the pyramid is the olive. Then one nerve or group of rootlets of nerves, you can see the 12th nerve is between the pyramid and the olive. Or posterior to the olive, one group of nerve you can see, these are the 9th, 10th and the 11th. So, this is the 12th nerve and behind it is the 9th, 10th and 11th nerve. These are the attachments of the 9th, 10th and 11th nerve. The brainstem from the posterior surface. In the superior part or in the rostral part, what you see is the pineal gland, which is not part of the brainstem. Then comes the superior and inferior colliculi. Below the inferior colliculi, the only nerve from the dorsal surface is the fourth cranial nerve. Then this is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Below that, what you see, the open part of the fourth ventricle. This is the midline and the median eminence. In the median eminence, in the upper part, you see the facial colliculus, and these fibers, these are called the internal arcuate fibers at the junction between the posterior surface of the pons and medulla. What you see here, this is the triangle. This triangle is the hypoglossal triangle, deep to which lies the hypoglossal nerve. Nucleus inferolateral to it, there is another triangle. This triangle is the vagal triangle, deep to it lies the nucleus of the vagus nerve. This is the gracile nucleus, gracile tubercle. Superlateral to it is the cuneate tubercle, and this fascicle is the gracile fasciculus. The cuneate fascicle is here most laterally. Take home message is medulla anteriorly there is pyramid and olive due to pyramidal tract. What lies due to olive? Inferior olivary nucleus. Posteriorly there are gracile and cuneate nucleus, and it produces elevation, gracile and cuneate elevation. 7 cranial nerves are attached to it. What are those nerves? 6th nerve, 7th and 8th nerve, 9th, 10th, 11th and the 12th nerve. Pons. Pons continues laterally as middle cerebellar peduncle at the attachment of the 5th nerve. The basilar sulcus lodges the basilar artery. In the midbrain, ventrally crus cerebri is there, through which passes the corticospinal fibers or corticospinal tract. Dorsally there is superior and inferior collicular, below which or below the inferior collicular lies the 4th cranial nerve, the only cranial nerve which comes out from the dorsal surface of the brain. You should study this topic from the Barr's Human Nervous System, 10th edition, textbook of Neuroanatomy by Patistus, and Fitzgerald's Clinical Neuroanatomy and Neurosciences, 7th edition. Thank you.